Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Write an Adventure, our ongoing live stream where we are writing D&D adventures in real time. I'm RJ Kerr, and as always, I'm going to be your your game master for the day. So I don't know why I started with that today. My brain's sometimes weird. Anyway, so today we are working on uh, our second adventure, and in fact, we're working on our first campaign length adventure on this channel. We started working on that about 2 sessions ago, and so we're going to be picking it up as we're kind of piecing it together in the very sort of early days of this. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and kind of review what we've got. So, we were working with our Notion campaign template here, and we were working with a new sort of story structure design, where you know obviously all structures are going to adhere to the Freytag's basic pyramid, right? Your exposition, your rising action, your climax, falling action, and resolution. Um, but we're going to be using a model of that conceptualizes this more as a circle and sticks a little bit closer to the hero's journey, which is kind of the classic mythic journey. And so, in which case, we have our 8 segments. We've got a segment of the exposition that kind of establishes who the characters are and where they are in the world, that kind of deal. We've got a adventure that's going to establish their need. What is it that there's going to be their overarching goal for this? We're going to have adventures where the characters get proactive and they make decisions that move the story forward, trying to advance towards this goal. Um, that'll continue on into the search and sort of the road of trials, as you will, as things stack up and get more difficult and complications move into our narrative. Uh, we're gonna have our game changing midpoint at the find, where vital information is revealed that shifts the direction of the story or changes the character's perspective. Um, a moment when they sort of take and bring that that information to bear and start utilizing it, start changing their approach. Um, and then our run up to our climax and the return here, where we have the sort of the story question is answered, where do the characters succeed or do they fail, and then what happens in the aftermath of that. So we spent a little time last time kind of just jotting down some very raw ideas as to what might be included in this. We talked about having an elemental villain that is sort of the embodiment of the evil that inhabits this domain of dread. We're thinking about sort of like the embodiment of the storms, the land and the sea and the sky that this that are in so crucial, so vital to the campaign world that we're building, story world, if you will, that we're building with this. Um, you guys came up with some great ideas about some factions, including one that's led by an aboleth and one that's led by Slotty. And so we have sort of a duality here in terms of chaos and law to some degree, although aboleths aren't necessarily intrinsically lawful, but I think compared to the chaos of the limbo born Slotty, they would seem more lawful. Um, we talked about some of the locations that we think we're going to have in here. Our central sort of citadel. We're imagining, as we talked about, sort of this crater-like bowl that has an ancient ruined city sort of spreading out over it. That is now flooded, so that much of it's underwater. The central spire-like citadel that kind of juts up out of the center of this enormous, what is effectively now like an inland sea kind of deal. Um, we talked about having some villages that are sort of scattered around the rim, one of which is underground. We talked about some floating islands and a couple different conceptions for that. The idea that we could have some that are sort of like ghost ships that have been kind of amalgamated together and kind of drift through this inland sea. We can have some that are floating in sort of the time warped magical aura of this place, caught in its state of perpetual rot. Um, and then we talked about an artifact that it will be central to our adventure, an artifact where the characters, one, need this to escape this domain of dread, but also that will provide them the power to either sort of release the inhabitants of this domain out into the material plane and hope that the evil doesn't come with them, or the ability to destroy this domain and everything in it to avoid the evil inside infecting the rest of the material world of the material plane. And so we have kind of jotted down a bunch of different options about that, and we even started building out some of the lore. This idea of a cataclysm that created this domain of dread, leading to sort of the time warp and the temporal freeze, as we talked about here. Um, so today we are going to be, let's move that down. Um, Today we're going to start digging into some of this stuff. This is a big project, and so we're going to be kind of cutting through it in chunks as we go, and kind of building little bits and pieces onto it, as we would with any adventure. Only this is going to be a series of adventures, and so we're going to take it in bites. Today, the place where I think I want to start, and there's no real rhyme or reason to this. It's more of that there's a place that I'm trying to kind of wrap my brain around that I think is going to help me understand the rest of our adventure arc here, is the need. You could start literally anywhere, wherever you have ideas if you're doing this on your own, and just kind of work out from there. In fact, there's a whole school of thought about starting in the middle, and then as that kind of gives you a grounding point to work backwards and forwards. So starting from that find point, perhaps the adventure where the characters discover the artifact that we talked about. I think that's what we said. Yeah, they find the artifact they're looking for, um, and so we could, there's an argument to be made for us starting here and building out this adventure and then figuring out how we got here and then what happens afterwards, from this point. But I and maybe we'll come back to that. We may end up doing that as is. But right now, I've been really kind of scratching my brain, scratching my head. No, I think scratching my brain is more evocative, if not the correct version of that. It is, I think, a little more evocative. I like it better. Um, I've been thinking about the need, right? Because the idea of the need is pretty simple. Our characters have to discover that there exists this artifact of immense power that they're going to need if they're going to escape this domain of dread. And the question is, how do they figure that out? Right? So that's kind of what we need to figure out. And I really like the idea of this being presented in the form of an adventure. So we're going to do some brainstorming for this. We're going to, we'll probably start a new page just to keep this section clean so we can build out with it. So let's start a new page here. And we're going to say need adventure brainstorming. So this adventure is going to set the tone for much of what is to come, which is part of the reason why I really want to wrap my brain around it before we get too far into the weeds here. We don't necessarily have to, really have it completely etched out in stone, but the basics of it I want to understand, um, because we're still really setting the stage with this. Our you is a lot of exposition. It's a lot of sort of explanation and letting the characters do a little bit of exploration on themselves. But need is where the action starts to happen, and as such, um, this should be well. Let me backtrack here and kind of talk a little bit about some of the methodology that we're using as kind of the artifice of this series. So there are, um, since I'm going to talk for a minute, we'll go back to our talking head. Um, there are two types of players, right? There are players who are either, I'll call them proactive, and then players that are reactive. And I don't mean that to have any sort of negative connotation. And both of those playing styles are perfectly valid. But proactive players are players whose characters show up and have goals independent of the adventure that you're running. These are these are the players that show up and give you the backstory about how their character is on a mission from their home druid circle to discover X, Y, or Z, and now and that they're out adventuring because of this, and this is what they're looking for, right? Um, and those players want to follow that adventure. They have this adventure in mind. They have a goal in mind. They want to follow that, and what they're looking for from you, in many cases, is to create that adventure to let them play it, right? Um, then you have reactive players, and reactive players are the ones who want to get caught up in a story. They have a character, but the character doesn't necessarily have any strong motivations or goals. They want to be given a goal and then pursue that doggedly. They want to get wrapped up in a narrative. And a lot of the times when we're writing kinds of stuff like this, especially when you're writing anything that's going to be, um, what we'll call writing a full module, as we'll call it. We're really writing for for those reactive players, because the proactive players are going to kind of weave their own story, and we're just filling in content as they come up with their goals and they make decisions as they go. It's a much different process, and it's a lot of fun, but it doesn't lend itself well to kind of what we're doing here. So what we're doing here, the artifice of what we're doing here, involves a little bit of assuming that we're dealing with reactive players who want to get caught up in a story and are waiting for us to deliver what the objective is to them. So, with that in mind, that gives us a little bit of information about what we need in our need section. We need something to happen to the players or to the characters. Hopefully, nothing happens to the players. We need something to happen to the characters. um, and so this should be, they show up, they're there, and something transpires. Um, if we're taking an example, this is our inciting incident. Um, you know, this is our fortune telling moment in the Curse of Strahd, where they meet Madame Ava. That kind of deal. Um, you know, this is when they get. Your characters are exploring Chult, trying to ruin the trying to solve the death curse, and they're set upon by Flaming Fist or what have you, or they're betrayed by their guide, uh, or whatever. This is them going about their business, and then something intersects and interrupts them. So let's think about that. So let's say we need something to happen. The characters have shown up in this domain of dread and are exploring. Let's see here. Their presence is a change in the status quo, which someone or something won't like. So that brings me to an idea of factions, right? Because we have a couple ideas for factions. We have people that exist in this world, and this is a good opportunity to illustrate some of that, because the factions themselves, I should say, the adventure itself doesn't need to center around the characters finding this artifact, because indeed they don't know about it yet. They should learn about its existence through the course of the adventure. And so the adventure's sort of story question, its own climax and question, are separate from that. And so integrating a faction or two into this, probably better to have both of those factions integrated into this, is a good way to kind of get them on stage, to show that they exist, and do some world building while we get the characters kind of wrapped up in what it is that that the story will eventually be about, or the adventure will, or the campaign will eventually be about. Let's see. So we need to understand our factions. Okay, so let's chase this a little bit. Their presence is a change in the status quo, which someone or something won't like. Suggests faction warfare. We're going to say warfare. I don't necessarily mean an all-out war, a gang war, anything like that. I just mean conflict in the extreme. I mean that this isn't just a passing dispute that the characters get involved in. That means that they get wrapped up in an all or nothing kind of battle, and we want that. We want high stakes in everything that we do. Well, I won't say everything that we do. We want high stakes in the central adventures, the sort of the adventures that we're going to write throughout this, because we can have low stakes and sort of the troughs between them, and that's where we can kind of get some of that relief from the high tension. That suggests faction warfare. Okay, so we need two conflicting factions. We have them. The Aboleth and the Slotty. Or the Slod, we'll say, because we probably just have at this level one Slod involved in this, which kind of raises the question of what level are we going to start this adventure at. You can pick literally any level. I tend to start this kind of stuff at level one, just because, frequently starting a new adventure, but we could start at a higher level if we really wanted to. Depends on how high the characters are going to climb. That's something to think about. Are they ever going to confront this Aboleth and this Slod? Because that will affect the level that they're at as well. Things to consider. Okay. So characters show up, and that affects balance, power between the two factions. the characters need to want something in this, and it can be as simple as survival. They kind of get pulled into the chaos of this. Should be an attempted kidnapping, maybe. They're new, they're interesting, they're otherworldly in the eyes of the entities that live here. Um, maybe that involves maybe each faction wants them, or at least wants to keep them from the other faction, perhaps. So, should this start with an attempted kidnapping of one of the characters? I kind of like that idea. So there's an adventure hook that I has always kind of stuck with me. I've never really managed to work it into an adventure, but it comes from stories of old Portland, Oregon, where um, you may or may not be aware that there are tunnels under the streets and under many buildings in both Portland and in Seattle. And while I haven't visited the one in Portland, I've been through some of the ones in Seattle. Very cool. Um, but something that would happen in sort of those port towns is we get the concept of Shanghaiing from there. The idea that you would have people who would go into bars and pubs and they'd be drinking, and then all of a sudden, literally the floor would fall out from underneath them, trap door would open, and they would plummet through, and they'd be kidnapped. They get kidnapped, they get put on a sea, they get put on a ship, and by the time they wake up, they'd be on their way to Shanghai, or some other far flung place. But the typical way the story gets told is they'd be on their way to Shanghai. And so I wonder if we kind of have a situation like that, right? Where it's kind of the characters, somebody's attempting to kind of press gang the characters into these two factions. And we have a situation where they kind of need to escape. And as part of that escape, they learn about this artifact. They become aware of rumors of this artifact, which gives them something to hunt for and move towards. And I think it should start as rumors of this artifact. So let's think about that. See, maybe we run with Seattle press gang vibes. The characters are minding their own business, and as they explore town and are set upon by a group of surrounded by a gang of thugs from one of the factions that attempts to kidnap one or all of them. So we could go a couple ways with this. We could set up this initial encounter so that the characters, or so that the kidnappers are going to be successful. We could we could make sure that the characters are outclassed. Um, we could make it a fair fight, and then we could run the risk of the characters escaping, and then being hunted, perhaps. Um, I kind of like the idea of it being an unfair fight to start, and them having to kind of work their way out, and escape, because that also gives us kind of a clean finish to it. Um, the characters are, yeah, they're clear of the adventure. They've succeeded from the adventure when they escape the facility that they have been, um, um, yeah, that they've been sort of absconded to. Let's see here, Amanda. Yes to kidnapping. I vote for the unfair fight. Yeah, fair fights are for suckers, right? Um, yeah, drug drinks that give a penalty to the characters. Absolutely, a good idea. Um, something to something to certainly talk about in a session zero with your characters if you're going to drug drinks, because some people that's a little triggering for, but it's realistic. And if you got players who are down for that kind of thing, yeah, all on board for that. So, um, okay, so we're gonna start with a kidnapping. Um, okay, unfair fight. Starting with the kidnapping. Kidnapping, an unfair fight that results in a loss by the characters who wake up in a facility run by one of the factions from which they must escape. You know, the very first D&D game I ever played was my dad was DMing. I was like, God, like 7 or 8 years old, and it was first edition basic D&D, and the starter adventure for that was very kind of similar to this. The premise was that you had been kidnapped and enslaved in the salt mines, and you had to escape, and you got all of your equipment by scavenging from it as you sort of tried to escape the salt mines, and what have you. And that was a lot of fun. That was a really cool way to um, kind of learn a character and build them up from scratch. So maybe redo something along those lines, not necessarily salt mines, as it were, um, but uh, um, but maybe we could do something where the characters aren't finding their own equipment; they're finding other equipment to kind of hobble together. Um, something to consider. Some if Everything really depends on what level we start this at. When I think about that, so we'll make a note. Let's think about that. So, from which limits escape. Maybe if we start at a low level, the characters have lost all their equipment and must scavenge equipment together to survive. Won't work or be satisfying if starting at a higher level. I sense a series of unfortunate events, Guy. Every story is a series of unfortunate events, right? Because it wouldn't be any fun if you just lucked out every time. Uh, um, all right, so let's see. Okay, so let's think about this facility. What faction are we going to run with? What do you think? Should we run with the Aboleths? Should we run with the Slotty? Um, who should be our initial bad guy faction? Because that is going to determine our characters' points of view on this. I'm kind of leaning towards the Slotty being our bad guys for this, the Slotty led faction, um, because a little more chaotic, I think, and also just I think a little more intrinsically evil. Um, I think it's just easier to kind of play that group as intrinsically evil. And then I say this because we're going to end up in a situation where how if these two factions are in opposition with each other, and one of them is the bad guy for this, that means that the characters are going to automatically be more um, they're going to be more favorable. They're going to be more forgiving of the other faction. The other faction is going to become, either good guys or they're going to become a more morally gray area as opposed to being straight up evil. And I think that there's a lot of stuff that we could do with a morally gray Aboleth led faction. Um, but what do you all think? Let me know. Let me know. I know we're on a little bit of a lag here, so we'll think about that as we kind of chew through this. Um, yeah. Um, yeah. Yeah. The Aboleth faction would enslave people with mucus, but they are lawful. Yeah. 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 Not good guys, for sure. Um, Also, I think we'd have to use the Slotty faction to start here with that, because that actually makes a really good point. Because there would be the question of, well, why didn't the Aboleth led faction enslave the characters with, the Aboleth mucus? How is it they've retained their agency throughout this such that they can escape? Um, so yeah, so let's go with the Slotty, I think, as our bad guys, and then our Aboleths. They can still be bad guys, but we need to be aware that the characters are going to treat them more as morally gray, unless they do some really awful stuff in front of the characters, like enslaving people with mucus. But for the time being, they might be somebody the characters are willing to work with. So let's see. Focus on Slotty faction as the villain of this adventure. So, what would a Slotty faction hideout lair look like? What would they want? There might be some kind of potion or antidote the Slotty faction has to weaken the Aboleth enslavement. Yeah. So Jonathan, are you think you're leaning towards the idea that um, perhaps it's the Slotty faction that is maybe helping them break out of the of being enslaved by the Aboleth faction? Because that could be interesting. That would be kind of a cool way to get both of those factions on the table right away. Um, hmm. I kind of like that. I kind of like that idea. That would be very chaotic of them, right? They would do the same thing, but they don't want the other group to be doing it. Um, there is kind of an anarchist's neutrality to that, right? Um, okay, so let's chew on that maybe. Focus on the Slutty faction's villain adventure. So, what would they want? We could say alternatively, the Aboleth faction would have enslaved the characters, and they regain their agency via a slotty faction mole that breaks their enthrallment, I guess is what we'll call it. That could be a good way. Could be a good way to get both factions in play right away. Means definitely slotty faction's going to be more viewed as the good guy until they do something to lose that that label later on. But we can always make them do things to lose that label. There's nothing wrong with that. Let's see here. That could be okay. So okay, that might give us something a little better to work with too. Because I'll be honest, I think I've got a better vision for what an aboleth themed layer might be like. Begs the questions. What does the aboleth faction want? And what does their layer look like? Some connection issues today. Yahoo. Sorry about that. We're going to keep plugging along and we'll see if they resolve themselves. Okay. So what do they want? Let's start with that. What would an aboleth faction want? And I don't mean that what they want from the characters. We kind of solve that. They want slaves. They want they want a workforce that they can enthrall. But what is it they're trying to use that workforce for? Is what I would ask. Are they mining something? Are they creating something? Are they are they populating vessels and ships and that kind of deal? What is it that they want? I kind of, wonder if it's like calcium carbonate, right? Like carbonate, calcium carbonate. Yeah. That's sort of that's what hard coral. That's what they make their exoskeleton out of. That's what a lot of you get some of that in some crustaceans and what have you. So maybe it's deposits of that the carbonate. Maybe that's what they're mining. And again, what would be the use for that? What would they do with that? That wouldn't be meaningful. There's got to be something that's a little kind of undersea that that they could mine, because this would have to be an aquatic kind of layer. I could see this as kind of set up with as part of the sunken, the flooded city, and we could have maybe some cenote like kind of passages and tunnels in there. It would be something to think about. I'm going to pull up in kind of another window over here. I'm going to pull up D&D Beyond, and let's take a look at the aboleths. Game monsters. Let's kind of see what the file is like on an aboleth. Okay. Eternal memories. Let's see here. Before the coming of the gods, Apples lurked in the primary oceans, underground lakes. Control. Their dominance made them like gods. The true gods appeared, smashed their empire. Okay. Ablis, never forget. They have eternal memories. Let's see here. They dwell in watery environments. Yep. Enemies of the gods. Hmm. Maybe they're looking for that artifact themselves. Maybe they're searching for it. And that's what they need the workforce for, is excavating portions of this undersea city, this flooded city. Maybe they need that because they know that they know that that's their ticket back to power. Because if they control that artifact, they would be like gods here in this domain, or the aboleth that runs this faction. Yeah, the elemental lord thinks of itself as a god of this domain. Yeah, I think it would. I mean, I don't know about you. I certainly would if I was the dark lord of a of a domain of dread. Yeah, I would think of myself as a god, and so I imagine that this faction is the enemy of that elemental lord, because this aboleth wants to be the god of this domain. It believes it is rightfully the god of this domain. So maybe it wants that artifact. It's another way that we kind of get that artifact in here, and we can get our characters kind of aware of it and on the same page. So let's say that the aboleth wants the we're going to call it the artifact. We're going to capitalize it because we don't know what it is yet. Artifact wants the artifact so that it can take control of this domain from the elemental lord that that reigns over it, like a god. The aboleth believes it is the rightful god of this inland sea and will stop at nothing to fulfill that destiny. And with that, we have a motivation for our faction. Lovely. Absolutely lovely. So, and we have managed to weave in both factions and the artifact. Okay, so let's sum up here real fast to kind of what we're thinking. So, let's just sum up, and we can do some more brainstorming, but I kind of want to capture where we are at the moment so that we have this as we move forward. And let's check chat real quick. So, Jonathan, the slide wants to have this domain spill into the material plane to create chaos. Another good creature-centric motivation. I like that. I like that a lot. Let me capture this, and then I'm going to capture that because I don't want to lose that either. That is really good. Okay, so let's see here. An adventure where the characters are kidnapped by a superior force from a faction led by an aboleth. They are enslaved briefly, but freed from their enthrallment by the intervention of an agent from a Slod-led faction. The characters must then escape the Aboleth's lair, and or be enslaved during the course of the adventure. They discover the Aboleth is seeking an artifact. The artifact of great power that will give it god-like control over this domain of dread. The characters should come to recognize that this artifact also represents their best chance of escaping the DD. Cool, the domain of dread. Okay, that's kind of a summary of kind of the ideas we've talked about here so far, so we don't lose that. But let me come into the factions here and let's capture some of those really good ideas. Let's say, okay, so we're at the Slod-led faction. So let's say the Slod, helps if I type that right, wants to have the domain cracked open and spilled into the material plane to spread and create beautiful chaos. Okay. And the Aboleth led faction wants to usurp the elemental lord of this DD and become the, I should say, and take its place as the rightful lords of this inland sea with the Aboleth as their living god. Kind of makes me think that Kuo-toa should be heavy among the Aboleth's followers, god makers that they are. Yeah, so let's make a note. Let's see here. Heavy on Kuo-toa minions? Question mark. God makers. Yeah, because I mean, I imagine that to be a god, you'd need more than this artifact. They'd need that sort of that raw power of belief that comes from the Kuo-toa to ascend beyond just lord and into actual, defaction. So yeah, and that would give us a creature to work with here. It would also give us an idea of kind of what level we want to start this at. If Kuo-toa start is our core minion for this. So let's take a quick gander at Kuo-toa. because obviously our base Kuatoa at a 1/4 CR is not going to be um, the overpowering foe that we need for the initial encounter. But Kuatoa whips, Kuatoa monitors, those could be if we started at a low enough level, um, especially if we started at level 1. Um, so definitely worth gives us a weather vane from where to start if we're starting low enough level. Okay, let's see here the chat. Also, maybe the Slod was summoned to the demiplane and can't shift out unless the demiplane spills into the material plane, breaking the barrier, keeping it trapped. That would make a lot of sense to me. That's kind of like the thing with Domain of Dreads, right? That they're like pitcher plants. It's really easy to get in. It's really hard to get out. Um, so yeah, we could say, let's capture that. Let's capture that. Slod was summoned into this Domain of Dread and can't escape until the domain is opened to the material plane. And we'll say it's kind of a 2 for a goal. Escape and the spread of chaos. Cool. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Cool. All right. So we've got some faction goals. We've got the core of our adventure. I think I'm kind of leaning towards starting this at level 1. I, that just makes kind of sense to me. Let's do a quick challenge rating check. Let's check out Xanathar's and see kind of how this would balance out with our encounter building, because we need this to be a tough encounter. Let's see here. If we did what? Whips were CR1. Yeah. Whips were CR1, and then monitors were CR3. I'm thinking probably starting at level 1. Level 2 at the highest. Because level 1, that's 5 PCs to 1 challenge rating 1 creature. Level 2 is 3 PCs to 1 challenge rating 1 creature. And so easy enough for us to do a low number of these monsters and have it be an overwhelming kind of fight. And which I think is kind of what we want. So let's say the need is, let's see here, an adventure for 4X first level characters. And we could do it for more than 4X, more than 4 of them. I just tend to find that 4 player characters seems to be kind of a sweet spot, I think, in terms of you have enough diversity in the group that you can handle a lot of different situations, but at the same time, you have a few enough of them that everybody gets lots of gameplay. So let's hear Jonathan. The characters don't have to confront the slot of the Aboleth directly at first level. Agreed. Negotiation stealth might be the prudent tactics with small victories to build levels of and notoriety. 100% agree with that. Wouldn't have them confront the characters. Wouldn't have them confront the Aboleth or the slot at first level. In fact, there's probably more than this Aboleth probably has more than one kind of facility that it's working, that it probably has, I should say, more than one of these sorts of excavation sites that it's operating. and therefore has the therefore there's no reason for the aboleth to necessarily be there. It would probably be run by these Kuatoa doing the grunt work, as the overseers of all the their sort of enslaved thralls. Um, yeah, and cool. All right, I think we've got what we need here to start. We've got um, yeah, I think we've kind of got our basics down to start building out this need adventure, this first adventure, that'll kind of lay the foundation for what we're doing here. So next time, yeah, I think next time, unless I can kind of get a burst of inspiration somewhere else, we'll start digging into uh, writing this first adventure and kind of how the characters initially experience our very own domain of dread. So, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate it. I love when we get to have these conversations in the chat. You have no idea how happy that makes me to get to talk to you guys about this. I so rarely get to have these conversations, and it really means a lot to me to chat with you all. So thank you very much for that. If you are enjoying my content, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. All that kind of stuff helps this channel grow and helps me keep doing what I'm doing here. So thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you all next time. So we'll see you again on Monday. Have a great night.